Good Shabbos and a happy Hanukkah, a Freilich Hanukkah. It's great to be learning with you on a Friday. Let's light up the darkness. And I apologize. Pretty sure something went wrong with the system. I do everything the same. But I think that the YouTube is not happening. So hopefully the people who normally watch on YouTube are migrating over to Facebook, and we'll catch it live today. And after the class is over, I'll just post it on YouTube. But I apologize to the folks who normally watch on YouTube.
Just wanted to confirm it's not on YouTube.
Yeah, it's not on YouTube. I don't know why. Okay, so we'll post it up on YouTube after the show. Who's in the house over here on Facebook? Paul in the Great Northwest saying Shabbat Shalom. Sharon in New Jersey with Hag Urim Sameach, a beautiful greeting. The Festival of Lights. May we have joy on it. John in Maine. Gordo in Scotland. Shandora in the Bronx. Wishing everyone Hag Sameach. Karen in Northern California. Bill in mid-Missouri, who is in a paper crunch, so he'll catch us up later on the replay. Oh wait, Sharon having no sound. Oh boy. Can you guys hear me? I want to make sure that we're getting audio. This tells me I'm getting audio. There's always a delay, but let me know if you can hear me. If not, maybe we'll just start this whole thing over again. Joseph says, yes, he's got sound. Okay, so hopefully, Sharon, you can work that out. Renee's got audio, so audio seems to be okay. All right. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Dr. John Shore, who's dedicating in honor of Miriam Bat Chava and Evelia Bat Sarah. May they be showered in blessings, your beautiful family, John, and may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen, and thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. I'm going to put this one aside right here. Okay. Let's do this. Today's daf is not terribly long, but nor is it terribly easy. So let's just settle in and get our Talmud cup, right? Our Talmud head in the game, and see if we can follow the reasoning. So we're opening chapter 4 with Mishna number 1 here in chapter 4. We're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, into the weeds of goring and what happens when a goring when somebody's ox is gored by another, and how we actually assess the damages. Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 4. With regard to an innocuous ox, right? So an ox without a history of goring, that gored 4 or 5 other oxen, one after the other, its owner shall pay. So now we know that the general rule is that if my ox gores your ox, and my ox doesn't have a history of goring, so then I am on the hook to pay you half the value of the damages that you sustained. And the damages that you sustained, the money that I'm going to use to pay you can only come out of my ox, right? Either we're going to split the ox, as it were, share ownership of the ox, or we're going to sell the ox. And then the money can come only from that ox itself. You don't have recourse to my other property the way you would if it was a forewarned ox, right? So an ox that has a history of goring. Now, in this case, where my ox is going to gore not just your ox, but your ox and Reuven's ox and Shimon's ox and Levi's ox, so it's definitely a problem that for you guys that it's an innocuous ox, because you can only look to the ox itself to recover damages. If it was a forewarned ox, you could go to my other property, and you would get the full amount of your damages. So you would all, go to my other property, and you could all be made whole. But if these oxen are all about the same size, and my ox killed 4 or 5 different oxen belonging to other people, so those people are definitely not going to be made whole because they can only look to my ox for recourse. But exactly how do they divide it? You might think, okay, let's say my ox kills 4 other oxen. Let's say my ox is worth 200 dinars. Your oxen are worth 200 dinars. So each of you, since you only get half damages when your ox is killed by an innocuous ox, so each of you are entitled to 100 dinars. My ox is worth 200 dinars. So you would think that the 4 people would divide up my 200 dinar ox, and each person gets 50. But the wrinkle, and the reason it doesn't come out that way, is because each time my ox gores somebody else's ox, we do the calculations at that moment, right? We do the calculations at that moment, who's owed what. And then if people are becoming partners with me in ownership of my ox, then as partners, we own an ox that then goes and gores somebody else. So it actually turns out, at least according to one view, that the one who gets gored last, his owner is going to be in the best position. According to other views, the one whose ox gets gored first is in the best position. Let's understand this. So with regard to an innocuous ox that gored 4 or 5 other oxen, one after the other, the owner shall pay the owner of the last one of them half the damages from the proceeds of the sale of the belligerent ox meaning the one that gored. And if there is surplus value left in his ox after he pays the owner of the last ox that was gored, he shall return it to the owner of the previous ox that was gored, right? The second to last. And if there is still some surplus value left in his ox after he pays that owner, then he shall return it to the one prior to the previous one. And the principle is that the owner of the last of the oxen gored in succession, he's the one who gains. And this is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Rabbi Meir, and he says that the division of the compensation is like this. With regard to an innocuous ox worth 200 dinars, that gored an ox worth 200 dinars and killed it, and the carcass is worthless, so the injured party takes 100 dinars, i.e. half the cost of the damage, from the proceeds of the sale of the belligerent ox. And the owner of the belligerent ox takes the remaining 100 dinars. That's the simplest case. If the ox, after goring the first victim ox, but before compensation had been paid, again gored another ox worth 200 dinars, and the carcass is worthless, so then the owner of the last ox that was gored takes 100 dinars. And with regard to payment for the previous goring, the owner of this ox that was gored takes 50 dinars, which is half the remaining value of the belligerent ox, after 100 dinars were paid to the last injured party, and the owner of that belligerent ox takes the remaining 50 dinars. And if the ox, after goring the first 2 oxen, but before compensation had been paid, again gored another ox that was worth 200 dinars, and the carcass is worthless, so the last injured party takes 100 dinars, the previous one takes 50, and the first 2, i.e. the first injured party and the owner of the belligerent ox, divide the remainder, each receiving 1 gold dinar, which is worth 25 silver dinars. Did you follow all of that? Don't worry if it's confusing. It was definitely confusing to me. It becomes slightly clearer as we go into the Gemara. Says the Gemara, whose opinion is expressed in this Mishnah? Apparently, the Mishnah is neither in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, nor in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, as we learned their opinions on page 33. And the Gemara explains, if the Mishnah had been in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that the owners of gored oxen are considered creditors of the owner of the belligerent ox, right? If my ox gores your ox and you sustain 200 dinars worth of damage, and you're only going to get paid half because my ox was an innocuous ox, so now I owe you 100 dinars. According to Rabbi Yishmael, it's like you're my creditor and I'm your borrower, right? I owe you this money. Rabbi Akiva says it's not only that I owe you the money, it's that you now become a partial owner in my ox, the belligerent ox that gored your ox. You immediately become a partial owner. So that's the difference. The money might come out the same, but as we change the facts and circumstances, the money won't come out the same due to these fundamental philosophical approaches that are different between Rabbi Yishmael, who says the victim, the owner of the victim ox, the injured party, becomes a creditor to the owner of the belligerent ox, and Rabbi Akiva, who says that the owner of the injured ox becomes a partner in ownership of the belligerent ox. Okay, so the Gemara explains, if the Mishnah had been in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that the owners of the gored oxen are considered creditors of the owner of the belligerent ox, then instead of stating this law, that the owner of the last of the oxen gored in succession is the winner, in the sense he's going to get the most, he's the one who's going to be made whole and the other ones are not. So the Mishnah should have stated that the owner of the earliest of the oxen gored in succession is the one who is made whole. He's the one who gains, right? If it was according to Rabbi Yishmael, the first one would do the best, the first one who got gored, because he became a creditor first, right? And so when you have one guy who owes money to 3 different guys, so the one that he owed, that he became indebted to first, is the first creditor in line, right? And then the other ones become, are further back in line to get paid, that the earliest debt is going to have an advantage in getting paid off. So according to the view of Rabbi Yishmael, that the owner of the injured ox becomes a creditor of the owner of the belligerent ox, you would think that the one who got gored first is in the best position. But our Mishnah teaches that the one who got gored last is in the best position. So it must not be, that the law must not be according to Rabbi Yishmael. And if the Mishnah had been in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that the belligerent ox belongs to a partnership of the owner and the injured party, so then, instead of stating this ruling that if there is surplus value remaining in the ox after he pays that owner, he shall return it to the owner of the previous ox, the Mishnah should have ruled that the surplus shall be returned to all of them, i.e. all the prior injured parties, since they all share joint ownership of the belligerent ox. Since these gorings all happened before any money changed hands to pay off damages, if we were following the law according to Rabbi Akiva, then my ox gores all these different people's ox. They all become partners with me in my ownership of the belligerent ox, the ox that did the damage. Now we would all be equal partners, and none of the owners of the injured oxen would do better than any other because we'd all be equal partners. Now, Rava said, actually, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that all the injured parties are creditors. And as for the difficulty you pose, that instead of stating that the owner of the latest of the oxen gored in succession gains, the Mishnah should have stated that the owner of the earliest of the oxen gored in succession gains. That and as to your objection that if it were in accordance with Rabbi Yishmael, the earliest would have been in the best position, we can answer with what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a case where the first injured party seized the ox to collect payment from it and consequently became like a paid bailee with regard to damage that it causes. Right? So it is according to Rabbi Yishmael. But the owner of the first ox who was injured seized my ox to make sure that he would get paid as a creditor. Once he had possession and control of my ox, if my ox then went and injured somebody else, that guy's got a problem, right? Because he became like a paid bailee who was paid to watch over the ox, right? He seized the ox. So now he has a responsibility to make sure it doesn't go and gore other oxen, especially since he knows that this oxen might do that. It killed his ox. So he's going to have to take extra precautions if he's going to step into that role of not only a creditor, but a creditor who has seized the property. And that's why he's going to bear responsibility along with me when our ox, as it were, even though he's not, this is according to Rabbi Yishmael, not according to Rabbi Akiva, he's not my partner in ownership, but he is holding on to my ox so that he can get paid from it. And it was while he was holding it that it went and gored someone else. So that's why he's going to share in the loss of, that's my loss and now also his loss when we have to pay damages to that third party and so on down the chain. So the Gemara asks, well, if so, instead of the Mishnah stating that if there is surplus value left in his ox after he pays that owner, he shall return it to the owner of the previous ox that was gored, the Mishnah should have stated that he shall return it to its owner, since half the value of the belligerent ox belongs to its owner, who is not responsible for any later damage that it causes because this guy seized my ox and now he became its caretaker. Why should I be responsible if that ox now goes and does damage? I had no control over it. And the Gemara and Ravina said, yes, that this is what the Mishnah is teaching. If there is surplus value with regard to its damages, i.e. the latter injured party sustained less of a loss than the previous one, that injured party shall return this surplus value to the previous injured party, not to the original owner, but just to the previous party in this chain of succession. And similarly, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, he related that Rabbi Yochanan said the Mishnah touched on this topic with regard to the bailee's negligence, right? Meaning, since he seized my ox, he became like the caretaker, the bailee. And that's why, if it then went and gored, he's going to be in the place of the owner in terms of bearing liability. So the Gemara asks, in accordance with which opinion did you interpret the ruling in the Mishnah? Was it in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael? If so, say the latter clause of the Mishnah that Rabbi Shimon says that the division of the compensation is as follows with regard to an innocuous ox worth 200 dinars, that gored an ox worth 200 dinars, thereby killing it, and the carcass is worthless. The injured party takes 100 dinars from the proceeds of the sale of the belligerent ox, and the owner of the belligerent ox takes the remaining 100 dinars. If the ox, after goring the first ox, but before compensation had been paid, again gored another ox worth 200, we're restating the Mishnah, worth 200 dinars, and the carcass is worthless, the owner of the last ox that was gored takes 100 dinars, and with regard to payment from the previous goring, the owner of this ox that was gored takes 50, which is half the remaining value of the belligerent ox after 100 dinars were paid to the last injured party. And the owner of that belligerent ox takes the remaining 50. If the ox, after goring the first two, but before compensation had been paid, again, we're still just rereading the Mishnah, now being restated in the Gemara, again gored another ox worth 200 dinars, and the carcass is worthless. The last injured party takes 100 dinars, and the previous one takes 50, and the first two divide the remainder, which is 1 gold dinar, worth 25 silver dinars. And so the Gemara continues, in the ruling of Rabbi Shimon, which we just read, we arrive at the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, right? So in other words, the Gemara is saying it must be that what they're arguing is that the Mishnah seems to be starting, according to the view of Rabbi Yishmael, that the owner of the injured ox becomes like a creditor. And then at the end of the Mishnah, it seems to be holding like Rabbi Akiva, that the owner of the injured ox becomes a partner with the owner of the belligerent ox in ownership of the belligerent ox. Is it possible that the Mishnah could start according to the view of Rabbi Yishmael and end according to the view of Rabbi Akiva and these underlying principles? Is that possible? Right, so the Gemara says, we arrive in the ruling of Rabbi Shimon toward the end of our Mishnah, we arrive at the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that the ox belongs to its owner and to the injured party, who are considered partners in ownership of the ox. So is it possible that the first clause is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael and the latter clause is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? And the sages said that, yes, this is the case. It is possible that the same Mishnah could follow one sage's view, one Tana's view, right, the sages of the Mishnah, in the first half, and a different sage's view in the second half. That can happen. So the sages said, yes, that is the case. And just as Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, right, they were contemporaries, but maybe Shmuel a little bit senior, and he would say to Rav Yehuda, Shinana, meaning sharp-toothed one. He's saying, you're very bright. I really respect your learning and acumen, but you need to listen to me on this, right? That's how Shmuel spoke to Rav Yehuda when he called him sharp-toothed one. And he said, Shinana, leave the presumption that the entire Mishnah follows one opinion and follow my interpretation. Yes, the first clause is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, and the latter clause is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And it was also stated that Rabbi Yochanan says the practical difference between the opinions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah is with regard to a case where the injured party consecrated the ox. If he is a partner in the ownership of the ox, his consecration takes effect. If he is considered merely a creditor, the consecration is ineffective. So evidently, Rabbi Yochanan also holds that the dispute in the Mishnah corresponds to the dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Now, having mentioned that, according to the view of Rabbi Shimon, when we get to the end of the line of dividing up the value of the belligerent ox and who gets what in order to be made whole or partially whole because his oxen were injured, we said that the last two guys would basically get 25 silver dinars each. But our Mishnah mentioned that that 25 silver dinars can also be referred to as 1 gold dinar. So it must be that a gold dinar is worth 25 silver dinars. About this point, the Gemara is going to explore a little bit. So with regard to the gold dinar mentioned in our Mishnah, we learned in another Mishnah there, meaning on page 90 of this text, of this volume, of this tractate, that one who slaps another is liable to give him a sela as a compensatory fine. And Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, he is liable to give him 100 dinars. And the Gemara relates, there was a certain man who slapped another man. And Rav Tovia Bar Mitana sent an inquiry before Rav Yosef, asking him whether the sela that we learned about in the Mishnah is referring to a Tyrian sela, which is worth 4 dinars, or whether the sela we learned about in the Mishnah is referring to a provincial sela, which is worth only half a dinar, or 1/8 of a Tyrian sela. And so Rav Yosef said to him, you learn this in a Mishnah, this Mishnah, and the first two divide the remainder, each receiving 1 gold dinar, worth 25 silver dinars. And if it enters your mind that the Tana teaches monetary sums using a provincial sela in order to calculate compensation, we'll let him further divide the value that the first two litigants receive and teach a case where the belligerent ox gored an additional ox, so that their shares decrease until they reach 12 dinars and 1 sela apiece, which are 12.5 dinars. The fact that he does not do so indicates that the Mishnah does not use a provincial sela, whose value is less than 1 dinar, and therefore a gold dinar cannot be divided in a manner that leaves each party with whole coins. So Rav Tuvia Bar Matana said to him, this is not a proof. Should the Tana have continued teaching additional cases, exhausting all possibilities, like a peddler selling his wares, who advertises every item of his merchandise? The cases cited in the Mishnah suffice to illustrate the point, and you can't prove that just because they didn't go to the last case to show that you're going to divide 25 in half, where he didn't really need to do that, and therefore you know how much that coin is worth. That's not a proof. So what halakhic conclusion, what legal conclusion was reached about this matter? And the sages resolved it based on that which Rav Yehuda says that Rav says. All references to coinage mentioned in the Torah refer to Tyrian coinage, whereas all mentions of coinage in the statements of the sages refer to provincial coinage. Therefore, a person who slaps another is fined a provincial sela, which is worth half a dinar. And following the verdict, that man who was slapped said to Rav Yosef, since the fine is only half a dinar, I do not want it, as it is beneath me to collect such an amount. Instead, let him give it to the poor. But then he retracted his decision and said to Rav Yosef, well, let him give it to me, and I will go and sustain myself with it. Rav Yosef said to him, since you already committed to give it to charity, the poor have already acquired it, and it now belongs to them. When you make a pledge to give to charity, the money that you are now holding in your pocket with which to pay off that pledge is not your money. We must all remember that. Once you make a pledge to give to charity, you're holding on to money that is not yours. You've already given it away, so much better to, as quickly as possible, fulfill your pledge. The poor have already acquired it, and it now belongs to them. And although there are no poor people here to acquire it personally, we, the court, are the hand, i.e. the legal extension of the poor. We represent them. As Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, orphans do not require a document that prevents the sabbatical year from abrogating an outstanding debt, known as a prosbul, by transferring the right of collection to the court. And the reason that orphans do not require this document is because the court is legally considered to be their steward, and their debts are therefore transferred to the court automatically, even without a prosbul. We're on page 37a now. I'm very close to done. So if you've got questions or comments, please get them in. Similarly, Rami Bar Kamma taught orphans do not require a prosbul, as Rabban Gamliel and his court were tantamount to the father of orphans, as they were vigilant to collect all the debts owed to orphans. And subsequently, the courts in every generation have this status. And finally, to conclude our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 4, the Gemara relates an incident. There was a fellow named Hanan the Wicked. That was his name. And Hanan the Wicked slapped a certain man. And he then came before Rav Huna for judgment. And Rav Huna said to him, go give him a half dinar, which is the fine imposed for such an act. And Hanan the Wicked had a clipped dinar. And he wanted to give him a half dinar from it, but there was no one who wanted to take it from him to give him smaller coins for it. So what did Hanan the Wicked do? He gave the fellow another slap, rendering himself liable to pay an additional fine of half a dinar, and gave him the clipped dinar as payment. Now we see why he's called Hanan the Wicked. That's what I've got for us today. Let's take a few questions. on Bava, Kamma, page 36. That was our daf today. And again, I apologize that we weren't able to broadcast on YouTube. I don't know why. I went through the exact same sequence I always do, but for some reason it only went to Facebook today and not YouTube. But we will mount it on YouTube at the conclusion of class. Okay, Lucy, but if an innocuous ox gores 3 oxen, does it not become forewarned? Perfect question. Your objection was also made by some famous commentators. Hold on a second. Where is it? Where was it? Here we go. So this ox that gored 4 or 5 oxen is referring to an innocuous ox. As in the case of a forewarned ox, the damages that the owner is liable to pay are not limited to the value of the goring ox, and therefore the last injured party would have no advantage over the first one. That's how we know it's an innocuous ox. With regard to the question of how an ox that gores 4 or 5 times can remain innocuous, Rashi explains that in between the incidents, the ox refrained from goring other oxen. Therefore, was never rendered a forewarned ox. Maybe these incidents were far apart in time. Or the Ravad suggests that the ox gored several times consecutively without its owner being warned. So it was not rendered forewarned, right? There weren't witnesses maybe there were witnesses to the gorings, but the news of the gorings never got to the owner. So he was not aware that his ox had gored the first, the second, or the third ox. He only heard after all the gorings had already happened. And that's why it's considered an innocuous ox, because it's not just that it gored in the past, but that it gored and the owner was told so that he would be on notice and safeguard his ox. In this situation, he didn't have that opportunity. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night after Shabbos ends here in LA, which is pretty early these days. Wishing you all a very sweet, uplifting Hanukkah. Remember, we light our Hanukkah candles before our Shabbos candles, because once we light Shabbos candles, it's Shabbos, and we can't light the Hanukkah candles. But try to spend some time just staring into the lights, meditating a little bit on everything that's good in our lives, everything we're grateful for from the Holy One above, what we can do, the repair that we can make within ourselves so we can be better fathers and husbands and brothers and sons and mothers and daughters and sisters, etc. And now that this is the time of miracles, the Hanukkah is the festival of miracles, please, God, send us a miracle. Restore peace, a secure and safe peace in our time, and so that all of our brave soldiers will be safe, the whole community will be safe, and everyone in the region surrounding Israel will be safe as well. We'd love to have that miracle. Perhaps the coming of Mashiach, may it be right now. And we say Amen. Good Shabbos and happy Hanukkah.